It's time for your sex and relationships questions. It's the Foxhole with Alix Fox, resplendent as ever. Hello, Alex.
Bonjour, Ollie. I'm feeling so sunshiny that Icarus has smutty posters of me on his wall.
What have you been up to in the last 30 days?
I have been, not for the first time, investigating how we can make what we do with our pink bits more green. And this is something we've discussed in the past, like how to be more eco-conscious with your sex toy choices.
Yes.
About 5-6 years ago, when there were all sorts of incentives to recycle sex toys. Then all of those mysteriously disappeared and it became a lot harder to do. And there was quite a bit of greenwashing.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of materials that go into something like a vibrator, isn't there? Because it looks like it's just rubber or silicon, but of course underneath, you know, you've got electronic mechanics, you've got chemicals, you've got all sorts of things.
Yeah, you've got aluminium,
motors,
copper, like lithium batteries these days. And unfortunately, partly because people are A, embarrassed and B, confused about whether they can recycle sex toys, more of us are using those kind of erotic products, which I think is a great thing, but more of us are then throwing them in the bin.
I have not noticed the speciality bucket at Hartsmere Recycling Centre for that.
Are you aware of the company BackMarket?
Yeah, don't they sell like refurbished phones and things?
Exactly that. They refurbish laptops and mobiles, things like that.
Oh,
I
no.
regret to inform
I don't want a
you.
refurbished dildo. I'm sorry, I don't.
Well, I was about to say the opposite. Sadly, they are not going to be able to buy a refurbished rabbit anytime soon. But they are helping to incentivise people to stop things going in landfill after they've filled themselves with it. They did some research and found that 1 in 3 people are just chucking old or broken sex toys in the bin.
Yeah.
They're not recycling them.
Yeah.
15% of people are too nervous even to do that because they don't want the bin men to find them.
Right, yeah. What do they do then? What do those people do?
They just keep them in storage.
Do they?
Yeah. They're dragging them with them from one house to another, or they're keeping them in a cupboard to fester and gather dust. So BackMarket have clubbed together with some other eco organisations to make this easier. And now I have tested this. If you go to recycleyourelectricals.org.uk/electrical recycling near me.
Wow, that is something that you wouldn't mind showing up in your browser history.
No, in fact, it
Sounds
seems
very
very
dull.
virtuous, doesn't it? Yeah. There is then a drop-down menu of various electricals that you can recycle, including now the option of vibrator. Some of the bin people will actually come and collect it from your door. You can just leave it on top of your wheelie bin, marked as a small electrical, and they will spirit it away for you.
You know, it is progress.
I also found out that, perhaps not surprisingly, the kink community are pushing things forward in terms of eco-responsibility. I chatted to a guy named Master Cosmic, a dominant, and he was telling me how there is a big demand for second-hand floggers and canes, impact implements that have a storied history. So actually buying something...
Playing into the theme, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Buying something second-hand that has been used throughout the decades by famous dominatrixes can actually mean that it's worth more.
Let's take your sex and relationship question for the month, which comes from man-fan Andrew, who says... Alex, I keep hearing about how tons more people are trying out various forms of ENM. Quick definition, please.
Ethical non-monogamy, also called CNM, consensual non-monogamy.
And although I'm naturally inclined towards monogamy myself, amongst my friends, this certainly seems to be a trend. One pal who's polyamorous recently mentioned that he was looking into buying a house with 2 of his partners. And that got me thinking about what the law says about romantic relationships with more than one person. What are the legal differences, if any, for, quote, traditionally married couples versus people in more modern multi-person arrangements when it comes to things like getting a mortgage or what happens to the home if there's a split?
This is an excellent question. I think a lot of the discussions of whether non-monogamy is a good idea or not that I've seen usually tend to focus on, will somebody get jealous? They talk about emotions rather than finances or legal implications.
Yes, we actually did an episode, didn't we, about polyamory?
Yes.
A thruple we spoke to. And I suppose we were somewhat guilty of that. I mean, it's titillating, isn't it, to imagine what it's like emotionally being in that relationship. But we did try and concentrate on some of the practical matters. And that throuple that we were speaking to then, it was about 5 years ago, and they were in the United States, it did seem like they were winging it.
I think it is really important to discuss these things because, say, if somebody passes away and their partners aren't legally protected.
It's all the same stuff people used to talk about in gay relationships, isn't it, before we had civil partnerships?
Yep. I discovered in my research that a lot of these legal issues also have resonance to people in other modern relationships. If you're cohabiting with someone, for example, if you are maybe planning to live with some friends as you become older. We're an aging population. I know that me and my girlfriends, we have open discussions about how if our partners die before us, we all intend to get a house together. The law would not currently protect us if one of us became ill in that situation, or if one of us died.
In the case of death, though, there's not an automatic mechanic like there is with a husband and wife situation.
No.
But the point is, you can write a will, right? You can say in your will, I give 1/5 of my estate to each one of my 5 lovers, and that is legal. You can do that.
You can, but the problem is that a lot of people don't. They don't think that far down the line. They don't preempt the issues until the issues actually occur.
I suppose it's subject to inheritance tax as well, isn't it? Because you're not spouses, yeah.
You're very good.
Yeah.
I spoke to Rachel Frost-Smith, who's legal director of the family team at Burkitt's law firm. She kind of gave me an overview of some of the issues that might be faced by consensually non-monogamous groups of folks. Firstly, she pointed out that the law really does lag behind. She said a lot of the laws pertaining to things like marriage and relationships and inheritance are based on a Judeo-Christian ethos, with monogamous opposite-sex marriage really as a starting point. So everything that they're modelled around is inherently not non-monogamous. There have been changes. Things like no-fault divorces have come into play recently. Same-sex couples can marry. Those are all still quite fresh legal changes, though. And the law is a big ship that tends to take a long time to turn. It's not always very nimble. Being married to more than one person is still illegal, according to Section 57 of the Offences Against the Person Act of 1861. You can serve up to 7 years for marrying more than one person.
I mean, of course, that was there to stop bigamy, right? That was there so that you didn't have a wife in every port and they didn't know about each other. So it is a different thing, isn't it, to a consensual situation where everyone's up for it?
Absolutely, it is. That law was put in place to protect people in a different situation, but the problem is that the letter of the law now doesn't serve people who have embraced that situation under different circumstances. So the law itself is looking a little antiquated. Consensual non-monogamous arrangements themselves can also be what I would term beautifully complicated. You might have 2 people in a polycule, for example, who are married, whereas then there are 2 additional people who live in the same house. Maybe there's a child that was born to one of the people in this polycule. Yes. You get what I'm trying to illustrate here.
There's a play on at the West End at the moment, isn't there, Unicorn, which is about bringing a third person into a marriage, and that's often how some polyamorous relationships start, isn't it? As a sex thing, as a threesome, and then it becomes something emotional. It's not always that you start as a relationship of equals. There might be a core couple at the heart of it.
Frequently, but not always, non-monogamous relationships go through seasons. So some people might come and go. That there might be a central core of people who remain romantically invested in one another, but then there are other
like
people
the Sugar
around the
Babes.
edges. Yeah, exactly.
Changing
round,
lineup.
round, baby. Round, round.
Yeah.
Yeah. But what this means is that different laws can come into play within the same group of people. So for those who are married, you've got the 1973 Matrimonial Causes Act, but the other people living in the same house, despite being part of that romance, could be treated essentially like they were brother and sister under something called TOLATA, the Trusts of Land and Appointment of Trustees Act of 1996. I promise I will stop giving these long quotes soon. I'm just trying to show off that I have done my homework.
Finally feel very at home in this section of the foxhole.
So people do not tend to seek legal advice until there is an issue. This is something that also applies to monogamous people. There was a report done not too long ago, a Law Commission report, that showed a huge number of people getting married without a prenuptial agreement and examined the issues that was causing. When people get together and everything is all hearts and flowers, they don't want to think about a breakup or somebody losing their job, or a terrible disease striking somebody, we tend not to think of the dark, stormy days. We live in the sunshine. And Rachel finally pointed out that, most regrettably, bigotry can play a part too. People in non-monogamous relationships tend to be quite broad-minded folk. So sometimes those relationships will involve people who aren't straight. They might have people with trans or non-binary gender identities. Sometimes kink is involved.
So give us some real life situations that might be affected by these challenges then.
One example is property. If you want to buy a house with more than one partner, for a start, you're going to need to sort out a declaration of trust that outlines who contributes what to actually purchasing the property.
Yeah, and as you say, that'd be the same as if you're doing it with some mates.
Yes, but there might be complexities down the line because of the romantic nature of your relationship. So being as clear as possible and getting that legal advice early is really important.
I see what you mean. So it's like a prenup
and pretty much.
A legal shared ownership document in one.
I have a declaration of trust because I've just bought a house with my partner and we're not married. Mm-hmm. We intend to be, but we're not. What we don't have, though, is an additional cohabitation agreement, which further looks at who pays what financially, not just pertaining to the purchase of the house itself, but things like the council tax or the bills, or it outlines what might happen if, say, in that scenario that we described before, where two people are married but other people in the polycule aren't. If those two people decide to get divorced and you co-own a house with them, then you can become what is called an intervener, somebody who has a vested interest in what happens to that property as part of the divorce, but who is not part of the marriage.
Mm-hmm. But it's interesting, though, you were talking about how, in many ways, like polyamorous situations attract non-binary people, queer people, more than perhaps some more, traditional monogamous relationships. In the same way, I feel like it probably attracts the kind of people who specifically don't want a contract. Like if your whole thing is kind of free love, and sometimes we sleep together and sometimes we don't, and sometimes we're friends, and I come here once a month, but I also live next door. You're not going to be the person who signs a contract that says, and on every fourth Tuesday I pay the council tax in a 1/3 share, and this is the proof of it, and here's my signature.
I challenge that.
Go on.
I don't think that non-monogamous people aren't sensible. We live in a capitalist society. It's really difficult to exist outside of that. Also, every non-monogamous person I have ever met is hyper-organised. These are people using Google spreadsheets and shared Google calendars to arrange when they're going to have dates. I absolutely think they're people who would like to make fair agreements on who's going to pay what. So, wills. I chatted to Lucy Bluck, who's an associate at Kingsley Napley, another law firm. And she mentioned the tax implications here. There's something called a spousal exemption where you can gift a certain percentage of your income or your assets to your spouse, either during your lifetime or after you pass away, without inheritance tax being paid. Once again, this goes back to a law made in 1837. So we've got that creaky door, copper plate writing all over again. That is just not the case for non-monogamous partners who have to pay a whopping 40% in tax.
Which again is there because of the right laudable reasons in 1847, right? It's to stop money grabbers, isn't it? Coming along to a 90-year-old man and having a relationship for 2 weeks and then taking all his money. That's what it's to stop happening, so that you can only leave money to your spouse, someone who you've both agreed when you're in sound mind you want to be in that position.
Yep, but it doesn't even function in that way, I would say. Medical emergencies, sorting out who exactly is your next of kin.
But can your next of kin be someone you're not related to at all?
You can give lasting power of attorney to anybody that you wish to. I didn't realise that you can actually specify several people to be your quote-unquote attorneys. What that does mean is that if you get very sick, you're essentially leaving decisions about your care to be made by a committee there. Yeah. So you have to trust that all those people will get on. And then finally, children. Right now, unmarried fathers are still treated very differently from married fathers.
In terms of visitation rights, etc.
In terms of parental responsibility, and all sorts of decisions to be made about, for example, a child's religion or a child's schooling. On the other hand, there are difficulties with modern family setups where a woman or a person with a uterus might act as a surrogate and have a donor egg and donor sperm and sort of be a vessel for growing a child, within certain aspects of the law, they will still count as that child's mother, even though they wouldn't perhaps consider themselves to be, and biologically are not. So things are complicated. Lucy pointed out that it takes a village to raise a child. Lots of people would agree with that.
So you might as well be having sex with them all.
Well, the law doesn't do very well at recognising the villagers. So hopefully I've given you a good overview here of the kind of struggles that you might run into. Rachel gave me some tips on how to handle this. Try and find a full service law firm with a modern families unit. And not only does that make your life easier, but it also means that all the legal documents that you're drawing up are coordinated with one another. They're symbiotic, so one's not going to clash with another. She also said look for lawyers who are part of a body called Resolution. It's got about 6,500 members, and all of these are legal professionals who put it front of mind to try and navigate potential challenges within families without splitting those families up and without causing confrontation. She also said, see if any legal professional that you approach will give you a free half hour or at least an introductory consultation at a fixed fee. Lawyers often bill by the hour. So if you're not quite sure what you want, these costs can spiral really quickly. So do a video call or see someone face to face if you can, to get a gauge of whether they truly are understanding of and compassionate towards you and your situation, who you are, how your lovers lead your lives. And finally, she said, because I did ask about cost, I thought, well, all this sounds grand, but it sounds like it's going to cost grands too. She said, if you do look for lawyers outside of London, that can be cheaper. Citizens' advice to a degree might be able to help with some things too. A lot of this, though, Ollie, although this is really solid advice, I came away feeling a little bit glum. I thought all these wonderful folks are riding out into this brave new world of modern relationship structures. They're having the guts to live their lives in the ways that suit them best. And yet there's a lot of warnings here, aren't there? It does seem a bit... It seems a bit trepidatious.
It isn't how society has been designed yet.
No. So I thought, well, I would really like to offer an example of how things can work and be brilliant. So I chatted to DK Green. I think that we have maybe quoted DK on the show in the past. He's a trans guy. He's a holistic psychotherapist. DK and his two partners, who all own a house together. I believe that two of them are married. They have a mortgage in two of their names because one of them earns a little less and contributes to the family in other ways. But they have drawn up legal documents that say that the assets of the house will be split three ways if it needs to be sold. They have a 3-way mirror will. It sounds kinky. Which means that if one person passes away, the other two will automatically inherit everything that's left. They navigated this by finding a female lawyer. All of this was very, very new the couple of decades ago that they explored it. But this lawyer was really excited to look into what was possible for them and make it work. So it is doable. DK advised not only insulating yourself legally, but also socially, though. He said there were some issues at the school that one of his children went to because there were problems with bullying. Neighbours had been gossiping. There was some confusion about who had the rights to pick up the child at the end of the day, things like that. DK actually went in and chatted to the headmaster and had a really positive experience. He was actually invited into the school to chat to children in an age-appropriate way about how some families have more than two parents. That wasn't quite the end of the issues. Unfortunately, there were some problems with neighbours. One neighbour who I think did have problems with the very idea of non-monogamy called social services, and social services came round.
Because they had a child.
Because they had a child, yeah. DK actually has a framed letter on his wall from social services apologising for the intrusion and literally stating that this was a malicious call and that everyone in the household is doing a great job of caregiving and parenting. DK did say, where you feel able, being open about who you are and how you live with people like schools and your neighbours can stop gossip and speculation. Not everybody is going to agree with you and be on your side, sadly. There are some people whose minds you won't change.
Well, and also some gossip is motivated just by interest. And people
Yes,
are
exactly.
excited by something unusual.
Exactly. It's very difficult to overcome malice, sadly, but what you can overcome is misinformation. So rather than let people chit-chat behind your back and wonder, tell them who you are and how your family functions. Ask the consensually non-monogamous community for recommendations of lawyers they've gone to.
I was going to say, yes, I'm sure that
resources.
there are Reddit forums for this, yeah.
And also he said, do get there first and establish your own protocols rather than waiting, say, for someone at your workplace to know who to call in an emergency or something. You know, go and lay down your own laws rather than waiting until things go wrong.
That all sounds like excellent advice. Although, ironically, when it comes to this podcast, I'm the owner. You have no interest in this. If you have a question of sex and you would like Alix to answer it for you in a future edition of the show, what do you have to do with it, Alix?
You can practice consensual man modernity by going over to modernmanwith2ns.co.uk and hitting feedback.